Good day, I'm Dr. Stolee. I'm going to try and take some of the mystery out of chest tubes today. When a person has a pneumothorax or even a hemothorax, what that means is that there's blood or air around the lung. So I'm going to draw sort of a lung here, maybe a little bit collapsed compared to the chest wall that it's inside of. That lung should be pressed right against the chest wall, and actually when we inhale, our chest wall pulls away, but because of the liquid joint between the lung and the chest wall, they both move together. But once you break that seal, just like if you have a plate on a kitchen counter that's wet, when it's wet, it's hard to get up, and all of a sudden it breaks. When that breaks the seal, then the lung collapses. The lung has an intrinsic spring to it that springs shut. So when you inhale, you use your muscles to inhale, but when you exhale, you just relax, and the air just goes out spontaneously. So that's because of this intrinsic recoil of the lung that wants to collapse. So as soon as you break that seal, let's say you're putting a needle into the chest cavity for some reason and you accidentally poke the lung, then air can leak out and break that seal and make that space open. Now we've got air around the lung, or we may also have another situation where there's some fluid. Let's say this is a trauma. There's some blood there and there's some air. So we need to get both of those out. So that's what the role of a chest tube is. We put tubes of varying sizes into this space, and that would allow us to pull that air and fluid out of that space. The problem is, if we just had a tube set up like that, that air could get back in, and that would defeat the purpose. Every time they inhaled, they create suction that would suck the air right back into that space. So how do we solve that? Well, long ago, somebody set up what's called chest tubes, chest bottles. And they would in one of these tubes would be in a pool of fluid. This is about 5 centimeters of fluid. Now, when you inhale, it creates negative pressure. It tries to draw this fluid up the channel, but eventually that amount of column of water is too high for the inspiratory pressure of the lung, and therefore air can't get in. But now when you exhale, that pressure coming from the lung can overcome this little bit of 5 centimeters of water, and bubbles can come out. So that would allow all the air to get out and into space. And you notice this is open to the world. The only thing that's sealing it is this water. So we call that water seal. So that's a chest bottle to water seal. It allows air out, but doesn't let air in. When we're filling it, we fill this tube up to capacity down to that valve. Then when it's up to the mark, then we can open that valve, and that'll drop it into the chamber, and that sets this one, which is the water seal. Yep. Now you can see that the ball is rising and falling. We call that titling. It happens with each breath.
Break that.
Okay, so this is the air coming from the patient
Here, I'll get it out of your face.
And when that's all done, then it should be titling again. Doesn't let any of the contaminants of the world in. They're blocked by this puddle of water. One problem is we've still got this fluid. We haven't dealt with that fluid yet, though. So somebody else said, well, let's have 2 bottles. And the first bottle will just be a big empty bottle for collecting that fluid. There's the fluid. The next bottle will be our water seal. Now we got 5 centimeters of water in here. And this is all the collecting, all this fluid is, dripping down there and collecting in this part of the bottle. That's the collection bottle. And that'll collect any old blood or pleural effusion, whatever you might have in there. This is the chamber that holds the fluid. Oh, we already got 650 out of there.
Hold on. Can you?
And this is the water seal bottle. The only problem is that sometimes that water seal isn't enough. The lung won't reinflate under its own power. So we need to actually get some negative pressure into this space in order to reinflate that lung all the way. And so we want to have suction. But we remember that out of our suction container, we have a dial, and that pressure is pretty high. I don't know exactly how high, but let's say it's minus 30 centimeters of water. That's too much pressure for what we want to do. We might suck the lung right up into our tube and cause more injury than we do benefit. So we have to have a way of regulating that pressure. Now, some of the more modern chest tubes will just have a pressure regulator. That's how simple it is. And you never see this next bottle. But I'm going to explain the next bottle because at least in our hospital, our hospital has the 3-bottle system. So in the next system, the next bottle, we have the suction coming in. It's minus 30 centimeters of water here, but we don't want that much pressure to go to that much suction to go to the patient. So we're going to regulate it by putting a column of water of 10 centimeters of water, let's say. And then we'll put a tube down into that. Now, if we have minus 30 centimeters of water and it comes into this space, this will be able to accommodate that minus 30 and turn it into minus 10 by bubbling coming up this way. So that is, this water will be drawn up into this space until it gets up to minus 10, and then bubbles will come out of here. Okay, so we'll see it bubbling constantly. Once we're at a higher pressure than what we want, this will start bubbling, and that's good. It's keeping this space at a minus 10. If it gets above minus 10, then this 10 centimeters of water gives way, and it starts to bubble. We're about to hook it up to suction. That suction is set by filling the other chamber, which is right there, to the level set. And for us, it's generally minus 10 centimeters of water. Right about there, where it's just kind of trickling bubbles through. So anyway, that's a form of pressure regulation. It keeps that pressure at minus 10. Water seal keeps it from getting back into the lung, and the collection bottle collects all that extra fluid. So we have dealt with all of our problems with the chest tube. Now, at some point, then we want to wean them off of this. So the order might say, put the chest tube to water seal. Well, how do we do that? Well, we just take off the suction part. If we take off the suction part, then they're back to this water seal. And that means that there's a tube that looks like it's open to the world that scares us because, oh my gosh, there's infection can get in. But no, there's this water seal that keeps that from getting in there. And it still lets air out if the air wants to get out. When we're on a water seal, if we see bubbles coming out, that means there's still pneumothorax. And almost no point in checking an x-ray at that point. We already know that. But let's suppose we don't have any air bubbles coming out at that point. Then we can check an x-ray, and it should show that the lung is up and maintained itself in the open position. If that's the case, then the next order might be to clamp the chest tube. And if we clamp it, we're going to clamp it between the patient and the chest bottle. That way, Now, when we clamp a chest tube, we mean that it's not going to do its job at all. And if the lung can still stay up when the chest tube is not doing its job, then we know it's safe to pull the chest tube out. Normally, for nursing purposes, you're going to see an order to clamp the chest tube. They'll go off to x-ray, get the x-ray, and then when they come back, you can unclamp it because we already have the x-ray, so we know we have the information we need. If you unclamp it and all of a sudden there's bubbling, well, you can report that to the doctor and say, well, when I unclamped it, there was a lot of bubbling. That would tell you that there's probably still some pneumothorax in there, and we might end up putting it back to suction. And then if on the other hand, there's no bubbling and the x-ray shows the lung is up, we'll come take the chest tube out, and hopefully the care of that patient is complete. Thank you for your attention.